Hey everyone, welcome back to Hong Kong Ghost Stories. I'm Simon. Tonight, we have a story that might make you think twice before accepting a late-night shift. It comes from a viewer named Chen, who worked as a bus driver for a private transit company in the New Territories. We all know that feeling, when you're tired, desperate for cash, and you ignore your gut instinct just to make ends meet. Chen ignored his instincts one rainy Tuesday night, and what he encountered on the old mountain road wasn't just a passenger. It was a memory that the earth itself had tried to forget. So turn off your lights, listen to the sound of the rain outside, and let's drive into the dark. It was 11:45 p.m. when the call came in. The break room at the depot was cold, smelling faintly of instant noodles and stale cigarette smoke. I was the only one left, staring at my phone, calculating numbers that didn't want to add up. My mother's hospital bills were sitting on the kitchen table at home, a growing pile of white envelopes that I was too afraid to open. I needed overtime. I needed a miracle. But mostly, I just needed to work until my brain was too tired to worry. The dispatcher's window slid open with a harsh screech. It was Uncle Zhang, the night manager. He looked surprised to see me still sitting there in my uniform, nursing a cold cup of tea. "Chen, you're still here?" he asked, adjusting his thick glasses. "I thought you clocked out 2 hours ago." "I'm looking for extra hours, Uncle Zhang," I said, standing up and walking over to the counter. "Anything. Cleaning, maintenance, a late drop-off. I don't care." Zhang hesitated. He looked down at his clipboard, then back at me. The rain was hammering against the metal roof of the depot, a deafening, rhythmic drum that made the silence between us feel heavier. "Well," he muttered, scratching his chin. "There is one route, but it's not a good one. IFAI called in sick 20 minutes ago. He was supposed to run the Old Mountain Line." I froze. The Old Mountain Line wasn't a standard route. It was a relic, a service that ran once a week to the scattered villages up in the hills, places that the MTR and the new highways had completely bypassed. It was a long, winding drive through dense forest, on roads that hadn't been repaved since the 90s. Most drivers refused to take it. They said the reception was bad, that the fog made it dangerous. Some of the older drivers whispered other things, about shadows that moved when no headlights were shining on them, about passengers who paid with old coins that turned to leaves in your pocket. I didn't believe in ghosts, but I knew that road was treacherous. "I'll take it," I said quickly before I could talk myself out of it. "Double time for the hazard pay, right?" Zhang looked at me with a strange expression, pity maybe. "Double time," he agreed. "Just be careful, Chen. That road is slippery tonight. And don't stop unless you see a clear signal. There's nobody out there this time of night anyway." He handed me the keys to bus 404. Of course, it had to be that number. In Cantonese, for sounds like death. A bad omen. But I grabbed the keys, forced a smile, and walked out into the storm. The bus was an old single-decker, a boxy thing that rattled even when it was idling. The heating was broken, and the windshield wipers squeaked with every sweep, fighting a losing battle against the torrential rain. I settled into the driver's seat, the worn leather cracking under my weight. I checked the mirrors. Nothing but darkness and rain reflecting the depot's floodlights that I pulled out of the lot, the heavy tires splashing through deep puddles. The city lights, the comforting neon glow of 7-Eleven signs and late-night dim sum places, began to fade in the rearview mirror as I headed north. Within 20 minutes, the high-rise apartments were replaced by low, industrial warehouses. 10 minutes after that, even the street lights disappeared. I was alone. The Old Mountain Road is deceptive. It starts wide and paved, but as soon as you cross the bridge over the Sham Chun River, it narrows into a single lane that snakes up the side of the hill. To my left was the dense, overgrown forest, the trees leaning over the road like skeletal fingers trying to grab the roof of the bus. To my right, a steep drop-off into the valley below, hidden by a wall of thick, white fog. The rain intensified. It wasn't just raining. It was pouring sheets of water that blurred the world into gray noise. My headlights cut through the dark, illuminating only 10 or 15 meters ahead. I had to drive slowly, crawling at 30 kilometers per hour, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. Thump thump. Thump thump. The only sound was the rhythmic beating of the wipers and the groan of the engine. The bus felt huge and empty behind me. Every time the chassis creaked, it sounded like footsteps. I caught myself glancing at the large interior mirror, checking the rows of empty blue seats. "Get a grip, Chen," I whispered to myself. "It's just a job. Drop off the mail at the village depot, turn around, come back. Easy money." But the atmosphere inside the bus was changing. The air grew colder, damp in a way that the broken heater couldn't explain. It smelled organic, like wet soil and stagnant water. It was the smell of a riverbank after a storm, earthy and heavy that I turned on the radio, hoping for some C-pop or a late-night talk show to break the silence. Static. Just a low, hissing white noise that rose and fell like breathing. I turned it off. I had been driving for about 40 minutes when I saw it. Ahead, on the side of the road where there shouldn't have been anything but trees and mud, there was a small, dilapidated shelter. It looked ancient, built of wood that had blackened with rot, and standing under the leaking roof of that shelter was a figure. My foot hovered over the brake. Uncle Zhang's warning flashed in my mind. Don't stop unless you see a clear signal. Common sense told me to keep driving. Who stands at a bus stop in the middle of a mountain forest at 1 a.m. in a typhoon? It could be a robber. It could be a drunk. But as the bus rolled closer, the headlights washed over the figure. It was an old woman. She was tiny, hunched over, dressed in a dark blue samfu, the kind of traditional tunic and trousers my grandmother used to wear in the 60s. She held a large wicker basket covered with a piece of red cloth. She wasn't signaling. She wasn't waving. She was just standing there, perfectly still, staring at the approaching lights. The rain was drenching her. I could see the water dripping off her gray hair, plastering the thin fabric of her clothes to her frail body. She looked so small, so defenseless against the raging storm. I thought of my mother. If she were lost out here, alone in the dark, wouldn't I pray for someone to stop? Damn it, I cursed under my breath. I eased onto the brakes. The bus hissed and groaned, the hydraulics complaining as I brought the vehicle to a halt right in front of the shelter. I pulled the lever to open the doors. Hisses. Clack. The doors folded open, letting in a gust of freezing wind and the roar of the rain. I waited. She didn't move immediately. For a few seconds, I just stared at her through the open door. She kept her head lowered, her face hidden in the shadow. The smell of river water suddenly became overpowering, filling the driver's cabin, choking out the smell of old cigarettes. It was pungent like algae in deep, sunless water. "Ma'am," I called out, my voice cracking slightly. "Are you getting on? This is the last bus." Slowly, painfully slowly, she lifted one foot onto the step. She moved with a heavy, wet stiffness. Thud. Then the other foot. Thud. She climbed up into the dim light of the bus entrance. When she finally looked up at me, my breath caught in my throat. Her face was incredibly pale, almost translucent like wax paper. But her eyes were kind. They were surrounded by deep wrinkles, crinkling in a soft, apologetic smile. She looked like any grandmother you'd see at the wet market, bargaining for vegetables. "Thank you, young man," she said. Her voice was soft, but it had a strange quality to it. It sounded wet, like bubbles popping in water. "I didn't think anyone would come tonight." "It's a nasty night to be out, Popo," I said, trying to keep my tone casual, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. "Where are you headed?" "Just to the stone bridge," she replied. "By the old village." I frowned. "The stone bridge?" "Ma'am, that bridge has been closed for repairs for months. And there's no village there anymore, just some ruins." She didn't answer. She just smiled that sad, gentle smile and reached into her pocket. She pulled out a coin and dropped it into the fare box. It made a heavy, dull clunk sound, heavier than a normal $10 coin. "Please," she whispered, "just take me to the bridge. My family is waiting." I looked at the fare box, then back at her. I didn't want to argue. I just wanted to get this shift over with. "All right," I sighed. "Take a seat anywhere. But be careful, the road is bumpy." She nodded, clutching her basket with the red cloth tight to her chest. She didn't sit in the front priority seats. Instead, she walked slowly down the aisle, her wet cloth shoes making a squelching sound on the rubber floor mats. Squelch, squelch, squelch. She went all the way to the very back row, the darkest part of the bus, and sat down in the corner. I watched her in the mirror until she settled. She placed the basket on her lap and stared straight ahead, her eyes fixing on the back of my head. I swallowed hard, hit the button to close the doors, and shifted the bus back into gear. As we pulled away from the curb and back into the swallowing darkness of the forest, a chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the broken heater, that I was alone in the bus with her. But as I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that the bus was getting heavier. The engine whined louder, struggling on the incline, as if we weren't carrying just one small old lady, but 100 people. And from the back of the bus, beneath the roar of the rain, I thought I heard a faint, rhythmic dripping sound. Drip, drip, drip. Not from the roof, but from the seat where she was sitting. I gripped the wheel and stared into the fog. Just 20 more kilometers, I told myself. Just get to the bridge, drop her off, and go home. I didn't know then that the bridge was not the end of the line. It was just the beginning. Welcome back. In the last chapter, our driver Chen picked up a mysterious elderly woman in the middle of a storm. Now, they are approaching a destination that shouldn't exist. If you're listening to this in the dark, don't look in your rearview mirror. The drive to the stone bridge usually takes 30 minutes from the main road. That night, it felt like hours. The silence in the bus was suffocating. I kept trying to focus on the road, on the rhythmic swish-swish of the wipers, but my eyes kept darting to the interior mirror. Every time I looked, she was there. The old woman hadn't moved an inch. She sat rigid in the back corner, her head slightly bowed, clutching that basket like it contained the most precious thing in the world. And the smell, it was getting worse. The scent of river water and wet earth had thickened, but now there was something else underneath it. Something sweet and cloying. It smelled like incense, the kind you burn at a funeral. We're almost there, I called out, my voice sounding too loud in the quiet cabin. I needed to hear myself speak, just to prove that time was still moving. She didn't answer. The road began to level out. According to my memory, and the GPS that had long since lost signal, we were approaching the valley floor. This was where the road usually ended, blocked by concrete barriers and danger signs because of the old collapsed bridge. But as I turned the final sharp corner, my foot instinctively slammed on the brakes. I gasped. The bus skidded slightly on the wet asphalt before coming to a halt. The barriers were gone. The danger signs were gone. Instead, the fog ahead was glowing. A soft, eerie red light permeated the mist, pulsing gently like a heartbeat. As the bus rolled forward slowly, the fog seemed to part like a curtain, revealing a scene that made my blood run cold. It wasn't a ruin. It was a village. Dozens of old-fashioned wooden houses lined the riverbank, their curved roofs slick with rain. But what froze me were the lanterns. Hundreds of red paper lanterns were strung up between the trees and the houses, swaying in the wind. They cast a dim, blood-colored light over everything. And there were people. Shadowy figures moved between the houses. They were walking slowly, almost gliding. From inside the bus, I couldn't see their faces, only their silhouettes against the red light. I could hear faint music, the high-pitched whine of a Swona flute and the clash of cymbals. It sounded festive, but distorted, as if I was hearing it from underwater. "What is this place?" I whispered, gripping the steering wheel. I had lived in the new territories my whole life. This village didn't exist on any map. Not anymore. From the back of the bus, the old woman stood up. Squelch. Squelch. She walked down the aisle toward the front. The heavy, wet sound of her footsteps was the only real thing in this dreamlike world. She stopped right beside the driver's seat. Up close, her skin looked even paler, with a bluish tint that I hadn't noticed before. Her clothes were dripping, forming a puddle on the bus floor. "Open the door, please," she said softly. I was trembling. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to reverse, to turn the bus around and drive until the engine exploded. But I couldn't move. I pressed the button. Hissus. The doors opened. The smell of incense and damp rot rushed in, overwhelming me. The sounds of the village became clearer, the music and the sound of rushing water from the river below. The old woman stepped down onto the wet road. But before she left, she turned back to me. She reached into her basket and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in dark green bamboo leaves, tied with a coarse string. It looked like a traditional sticky rice dumpling, but it felt heavy and cold. "For your mother," she said, placing it on the dashboard. Her voice was no longer wet, it was hollow, echoing as if from a deep well. "You are a good son. Filial piety is rare these days." I stared at the bundle, too terrified to touch it. "Thank you, Popo," I managed to choke out. She leaned in closer, her face inches from mine. Her eyes, which had been kind before, suddenly widened. The pupils were dilated, black holes that seemed to swallow the red light. "Now listen to me," she hissed, her tone shifting from polite to urgent. "Do not cross the bridge. Do not turn off the engine. Turn around. Go back. Now." "Why?" I stammered. She pointed toward the village square. "Because the festival is starting, and the living are not invited." I looked where she was pointing. The figures in the village had stopped moving. The music had died down. Slowly, in perfect unison, the crowd turned to face the bus. The red lantern light fell on their faces. I screamed. They were bloated. Their skin was gray and peeling, swollen with water. Some had seaweed tangled in their hair. Others were missing pieces of themselves. They were the faces of the drowned. And they were all looking directly at me with hollow, hungry eyes. The old woman slammed her hand against the outside of the bus door. "Gio!" she shrieked. The sound was like tearing metal. "Leave this place." The figures began to move toward the bus. They didn't walk anymore. They drifted, their feet not quite touching the ground, their arms reaching out, mouths opening in silent screams. Panic took over. I slammed my foot on the accelerator. The engine roared. The tires spun on the mud for a terrifying second before catching grip. I yanked the steering wheel to the left, pulling a U-turn so sharp the bus nearly tipped over. I didn't check the mirrors. I didn't look back at the red lanterns or the woman. I just drove. I drove through the fog, through the rain, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would crack my ribs. As I sped away, back into the darkness of the forest, I could still hear the sound of the Swona flute fading behind me. But now it sounded less like music and more like weeping, and here we are, at the end of the road. Chen has escaped the village of the dead, but he hasn't escaped the truth yet. Sometimes, the scariest part of a ghost story isn't the ghost itself. It's realizing just how close you came to joining them. Let's finish this that I didn't stop driving until I saw the orange glow of the sodium streetlights near the Fanling Highway. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the wheel. The bus felt different now, lighter, emptier. The smell of incense and river water was gone, replaced by the familiar, comforting scent of diesel and stale air conditioning. I pulled into the depot at 2:15 a.m. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the world slick and glittering under the floodlights. Uncle Zhang was still in the booth, dozing off over his newspaper. When I slammed the brakes and killed the engine, he jumped. He watched me stumble out of the bus, pale and drenched in sweat. "Chen." He opened the window. "You look like you've seen a ghost. Why are you back so early? Did you finish the route?" I couldn't speak. My throat was dry, and my heart was still hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I just shook my head, tossed the keys onto the counter, and walked away. I didn't care about the overtime pay. I didn't care about the report. I just wanted to go home. But as I turned to leave, I remembered. The gift. I froze. The old woman, Popo, had left something on the dashboard. A sticky rice dumpling wrapped in bamboo leaves. She said it was for my mother. I didn't want to go back into that bus, but a strange curiosity pulled me. I walked back to bus 404. The door was still open. There it was, sitting on the dashboard where she had left it, the dark green leaf bundle. I reached out and picked it up. It was heavy, heavier than rice should be, and it was soaking wet, dripping cold water onto my shoes. With trembling fingers, I untied the coarse string. The bamboo leaves fell away. I dropped it instantly. There was no rice inside, no meat, no filling. Lying on the floor of the bus were 3 smooth, gray river stones slick with green algae. And tangled around them was a clump of long, wet black hair. I backed away gagging and ran. I ran all the way to my car and drove home without looking back. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by my mother's bed, listening to her breathing, terrifying images of bloated faces and red lanterns flashing in my mind every time I closed my eyes. The next morning, the news was on the TV in the living room. I was drinking coffee, my hands still shaking, when the anchor's voice caught my attention. Breaking news from the New Territories. A massive landslide occurred late last night on the Old Mountain Road. Police say the collapse happened around 1 a.m., destroying the section of the road leading to the old stone bridge. Authorities say that if any vehicles had been on that road, they would have fallen over 300 meters into the valley below. I dropped my cup. It shattered on the floor. 1 a.m. That was exactly when I met her. That was exactly when she forced me to turn around. If she hadn't stopped me, if she hadn't made me open the doors, I would have driven straight off that cliff. I felt a cold chill, but this time it wasn't fear. It was realization. I went to the local library later that day. I had to know. I went through the digital archives of old newspapers, searching for accidents in that area. It didn't take long. A headline from 20 years ago. Tragedy at Dragon Boat Festival. Flash flood sweeps away Riverside Village. The article described a horrific event. A sudden storm had caused the river to burst its banks during a festival. The entire village was washed away. Over 50 people died. And there, in the grainy black and white photo of the victims, I saw her. She looked younger in the picture, her hair black instead of gray, but the kind eyes were the same. The caption read, Liang Meiying, 68, known for her kindness and charity. Her body was never recovered. She wasn't haunting me. She wasn't trying to hurt me. She was guarding the road. She knew the landslide was coming, because she was part of the land now. She knew the festival of the dead was starting, and she didn't want a living soul to be trapped in their eternal loop. She paid for her ride not with money, but with a life, my life. I went back to the bus depot one last time to quit, but before I left, I drove my car to the entrance of the old mountain road. I didn't go up, the police had blocked it off anyway. I stood by the roadside and lit 3 sticks of incense. I placed a real sticky rice dumpling and an orange on the ground. "Thank you, Popo," I whispered into the wind. "I hope you find your way home." The wind blew the smoke of the incense toward the mountains. For a second, just a second, the smell of river water and rot drifted past me one last time. But this time, it didn't smell scary. It smelled like peace, and that is the story of the night route. What do you guys think? Was it a guardian spirit protecting Chen from a terrible fate? Or was it just a glitch in reality? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And remember, if you're driving alone at night and see someone waiting in the rain, maybe just maybe keep driving. Good night.